Well, good morning, Connor. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Dev. How are you?
Good, man. The con man. Do people call you the con man, or is that just me?
Every once in a while. It was big in high school, but not quite after that.
Not quite after that. All right. Well, should we get this show started?
I reckon we shall.
Let's do it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immersive Medical Podcast. I'm Devin Marble. I'm a paramedic, a researcher, and a VR educator.
And I'm Connor Badalich. I work in social media, and I'm just a regular guy who wants to be a part of the solution.
This podcast is a think tank for the future of healthcare. If you haven't heard, the WHO predicted a shortfall of 15 million healthcare workers by 2030, which is not that far away. So, join us on the hunt for solutions in conversations with healthcare leaders, ICU nurses, EMS responders, educators, patients, and tech pioneers. Made possible by VR patients, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for your ears to be immersed.
Today, we're excited to have Sonya Haskins, the head of programming at the Augmented World Expo and a pioneer in the VR world. Not only was she the first ever virtual reality eSports competitor to play sitting down in a chair, she's also an accomplished author of 8 books and founder of the VR Community Builders, a group that focuses on promoting positive outreach through virtual reality.
Sonya is a true advocate for VR, believing in its potential to revolutionize sectors like healthcare, education, mental health, and business. She's a recognized figure in the immersive community as a world-class gamer, and today, we're going to learn how VR saved her life.
So let's dive in. We're pleased to introduce Sonya Haskins.
Welcome to the Immersive Medical Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Now, we already introduced you, so the audience is primed to listen to you. We're very excited and grateful to have you here. If you haven't heard the pod before, I want to say that our audience tends to be medical professionals. It's people looking to get better in the field of nursing or paramedicine or as a doctor. And we thought that it would be very relevant to bring a non-medical professional in who has had a significant medical experience. So our first question for you today is, how did virtual reality save your life?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. And I hope that my responses here today will help some other medical professionals consider ways that they might be able to use this technology for others. So basically, my story begins with quite a while back. I'll try to be succinct in sharing it, but in 2003, I gave birth to my last child. During that process, I developed blood clots, initially on my renal vein, my ovarian vein, but it ended up extending to pretty much everything below my inferior vena cava, and including my inferior vena cava, because they had given me heparin, which I turned out to be allergic to. It was HIT, but not true HIT, because I never had low platelets. You know, I'm sure the medical professionals listening will enjoy that side of the story. But long story short, it caused a lot of damage. And the doctors did not expect me to make it. But after 2 months in the hospital and a lot of, I had a type of chemoimmunotherapy called Rituxan, and then ended up making it out of the hospital. But I was not able to walk. I was in a wheelchair or a walker for the next couple of years, just trying to regain use of my legs. It was absolutely horrendous and very painful. I had a lot of nerve damage, lots of neuropathy and issues like that. So then fast forward to 2017, and by that time I had numerous recurring bouts with blood clots below my belly button, that area in my lower quadrant. And so I was in and out of a wheelchair over those years, or a walker, and I just had a lot of problems with my health. But in April of 2017, my oldest son was being deployed to Afghanistan, and he wanted me to try something called virtual reality. Initially, I thought it sounded really silly, but I went with him, put the headset on, and I thought, wow, this is an amazing thing. I immediately had this just overwhelming impression that we could use it for so much. Now, bear in mind, I didn't at that time really think about specifically the healthcare benefits, but I thought so many other things. I thought people could do so much with this.
What was the first thing you saw? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just curious.
Okay.
You put the goggles on. What was the first thing you saw?
So I did an experience called Robo Recall, where
Recall.
it's like you rip apart the robots and you kind of shoot them or tear their limbs off or their heads off.
This is a first-person shooter, right? Or a third-person shooter? This is a legit, shoot 'em up game.
Yeah, I'm kind of a little violent. And so
virtually violent, right?
I didn't realize I was violent until I started doing VR. And I was like, it was very, very therapeutic.
That's great.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, it is kind of therapeutic because you're like, you can take out all your frustration and just like do this. And
it's a safe space.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, please continue. I'm sorry.
And that first experience with VR is always so mind-bending. Like,
yes.
Never
and
been
the fact that it felt so,
you've never experienced that thing before.
Right. It just is so immersive. I mean, it felt like I was right there in the world with those robots. And so I just was quite impressed. So I bought it on the spot, took it home. I sat down and in my chair and started playing in my living room. And
was this an Oculus Rift?
Yes, I bought the Rift at that time. I bought the Rift, took it home, bought my son's computer from him because I had no gaming computer or anything.
Yeah, okay, got it.
I didn't do anything with technology. I tried to stay away from it, in fact, which is really ironic now because of the work I do. But I started playing, and that's where the story gets really interesting as far as the health side of it. I went home and sat down in my chair and started playing because, of course, the story I just told you, I couldn't stand up for more than about 10 or 15 minutes at a time. And without my legs would just immediately swell and hurt so bad. So this was April, about the end of May, I joined a beta for a game called Echo Arena. And it's a zero gravity sport game where you're flying around in what's simulated zero gravity, but it really feels like that because VR has presence and it's so immersive. You feel like you're there. And I'm really good at it. I ended up just being, a very good player.
Can you describe what this game is like for people who are listening? Because it's kind of like Ender's Game, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's unfortunately it's going to be phased out, and they're working on a new game. It'll be phased out soon, but I did that and also some other things, but mostly I played Echo. But the real important part here for the medical professionals listening is that the different things that I did, especially that game, I played so much, and I noticed two very, very important things that I want to make sure that people come away with from the message here. One was that I was so immersed in the game that it would help distract me from pain. So I was able to lower pain meds. And then the other thing was that that actually, as far as the effect there, I noticed that I was able to go for longer even after I stopped doing VR, because it was like the chemicals that are released when you're exercising or enjoying something are extended. And so even after I stopped playing, I could go for longer without using pain meds. And now I had serious health problems. Wow. And so that was really an important thing to discover. So I started sharing that with people. And I'm like, hey, I think we could use this for pain relief, or, maybe for kids in hospitals having procedures done, or people in chemo treatments, which, by the way, the next year, in 2019, I actually had to have more immunotherapy. And you're sitting there for 8 hours a day with an IV in. It made me nauseous. And so I did that with a VR headset on, just helped keep me distracted. And so, but the other thing I noticed back when I started playing in 2017 was I was able to be more active. Even though I was seated, I still moved a lot more than what you're going to move just watching TV or anything else you're going to be sitting there doing. So I started losing weight. So it helped in those two very, very important ways. I lost 40 pounds over 6 months. And by the next year, it was like a year and a half later, I'd say, I was able to completely come off all pain medications that I had been on, which are opioids. And I had been on those at that point for 16 years. And, that's a very, very important thing to discover, because it was absolutely VR that I credit for enabling me to make those transitions.
I can hear all the pain clinics across the country shaking in their boots right now.
Yeah.
This is an incredible story.
How much healthier to be doing something that you can be physically active and come off medications and you're using a device that's helping you to achieve a goal of pain relief without having to put chemicals into your body. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing. And I've heard other people, that there are some places that are using that now for pain relief.
Right.
And I just think it's a wonderful option.
Hey, Connor, have you ever wished that you could test your medical skills in a realistic but low stakes environment?
No, I haven't.
You're not a medical person, but that's okay because it's not a fantasy. It's called VR Patients.
That's right, Devin. VR Patients is a groundbreaking platform that lets you create your own virtual reality simulations. It's like a choose your own adventure book, but for medical scenarios.
And it's not just one kind of scenario. Any simulation you can imagine. You want to create a complex critical care trauma or a simple basic life support patient? You can do it all with VR Patients. And best of all, it's highly scalable, catering to 10 students or 10,000. Connor, did you know that they recently deployed to the entire state of Maine?
I saw an article about that. You really have to check it out for yourself at vrpatients.com. That's vrpatients.com for more information.
And if you're like Connor and you don't know medicine, but you got a VR headset at home, you can try it right now for free on the MetaQuest store or Steam. So I just want to make everyone understand the gravity of the situation here. We're not just talking to Sonya Haskins, hey, VR really helped me turn around my recovery. We're talking to Sonya Haskins, world-class gamer, right? You're an eSports gamer. You became world-class. Didn't you win awards? Weren't you up on stage, the only one sitting? And can you tell the story of your experience when you were invited out to game and they had to bring you out a chair? I would love to hear that.
Yeah, so that first summer, Oculus and ESL and Intel announced their VR league. It was VR Challenger League. And the first event was going to be later that summer. So when I really wanted to go, but, you have to qualify. Well, my team did end up qualifying. It was very close, but I was so excited and was invited to go out and compete at Oculus Connect 4, which was, of course, this the Facebook developer conference.
Right.
And so we got ready to go and they were asking people does anybody need anything or any special requests or anything like that? And so I said, well, I just need my chair. I just need a chair. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I play in a chair. And they were all like, nobody plays in a chair. Nobody plays VR in a chair. And definitely nobody can play competitively like that in a chair. And I was like, well, nobody told me that, and I didn't. That's how I play.
I still made it, yeah.
Right.
Right.
I think sometimes when we put parameters on people, when you have an idea and you create the bubble or the box, you're the one limiting others.
Right.
But if you just, if you tell a child or a person with injuries or whatever the situation, you make it clear to others that you can do anything. Just try and leave an open-ended options. Then you create a lot more opportunities. And so that's basically what happened, because I feel like almost if I had been a gamer or if I had already been involved with the industry, I might have had those preconceptions. So maybe I wouldn't have been as successful the way I was because I would have already had somebody telling me you should or shouldn't do this. But for me, I just really didn't know anything. So I just tried to do everything my way and it worked. And so when I got there, I was practicing that first night and I took my headset off and there's all these developers and Oculus people standing there just staring at me. And they're like, and so
just absolutely bewildered.
Yeah, exactly. And it was because they were amazed that I could move that much and play that well. With
seated in a chair.
Yeah, with the challenges and constraints that I had. And so I started chatting with them and really telling them you probably have a whole lot more people out there than you even realize who would play these games or who would do this stuff if you would create experiences that were accessible. And, if you wouldn't think, oh, only certain people will do this or can do this or will want to do this, instead think, we're going to make it for everybody and then let them come, like Field of Dreams or something, build it and they will come. And so I started kind of advising and talking to different groups and developers and companies about that sort of thing and pushing that idea about how it can be healthy for everyone and really telling them, if we want to make the most difference in people's lives, you have to give them something that is the most useful. And in my opinion, one of the most useful things you can give someone is better health. And so I was saying, like, we need to be making sure these experiences are accessible to them. So that, like, for example, if I play something and I want to reach up there to that lever, well, if I'm in a chair and you build it such that I have to be standing to pull that lever down in my game, that game, right, automatically I can't play that game because I've got too many things I can't do. Or if I'm doing fitness games and you market it so that it's, you're marketing these fitness games where it has like all these buff, healthy, perfect weight people, then you're automatically kind of making assumptions there and maybe turning people off who would potentially use this, who could benefit from it. And so I was like, why not realize VR is for anyone? You can be old, you can be young, you can be overweight, you can have heart problems, and you set your parameters, even better than, like, say, a personal visit to a gym or something, because the big important thing is you can do it at home where you don't feel embarrassed and you can be yourself, and you tend to push yourself further in VR when you're immersed because you just release all those inhibitions that make us not do those things when we're in the traditional fitness type environments.
You're also making a really strong case for diversity and inclusion in the creation of these systems and games. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to include diversity and inclusion in the representation of the avatars or in the simulations or in the games, and that is extremely important. But to ensure that the people who are going to be utilizing the tool it's built for a diverse and inclusive audience, I think is important as well. I think you're highlighting that.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to talk about diversity and inclusion. It's another thing to ideally, as in ideas, build that way. But it's a totally different thing when you say, okay, now we're ready to QA, or we're going to test this product and actually use diverse testers, for example, or people from a broad range of backgrounds and demographics. Because if you're not doing that, it's really not true diversity, because you aren't getting feedback from the people that you think you're appealing to. And so therefore you're really not having you may not be having the impact you think you are.
Agreed.
Sonya, I got a couple questions. First of all, what kind of chair did they bring you? Was it a folding metal chair? Was it a big lazy boy? What'd they bring up on stage for you?
That's a really great question, but I will have to give them credit. It was wonderful to work with them throughout the whole process, and Oculus asked me to approve the chair before I got there. So they sent me pictures and let me choose, and I just chose a basic, computer swivel chair.
Okay.
But,
Man, you had the chance to steal the executive's chair. Where's the leather chair that spins that's got like cushions?
Well, one funny part of that, though, funny in a sad sort of way, but kudos to them for what happened as a result. They got 2 of those chairs, Connor, and they brought them to the event. Those were the only 2 chairs at that event. The whole conference center, it was the only 2 chairs. There were no stools, there were no chairs, there was no place to sit. So the rest of the 3 days, I think it's a 3-day event, I literally carried that one of the chairs around to the different exhibits to try all those exhibits. And that was my one piece of feedback for the whole overall event.
Yeah.
Was that, this is a perfect example of how you're excluding anybody who's pregnant, old, has health problems, whatever reason you can't stand too long. If I did not have a chair that you gave me, I would not have been able to try these other exhibits.
Right.
So the next year, they had chairs and stools for every single exhibit they had at that event.
Wow.
So
Talk about an impact. Well done.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, that almost makes me tear up a little, because it's like, you really do see sometimes when you're making a difference. And so I think that was very precious, a precious memory.
Second question,
Good
just
job.
what kind of esports or what kind of games were you participating in? Because obviously the big when you think of like traditional esports, it's the fighting games like Smash Bros, Team FPS like Counter-Strike and Valorant, sports games, FIFA, Rocket League, that kind of stuff, and then MOBAs. So what were you specifically playing in? Like what kind of sporting or what kind of games does VR esports include?
So VR esports has several different areas. I mean, we have all those things you mentioned pretty much, but for me personally, I'm mostly focused on Echo because I felt it was a true representation of something unique that did not exist elsewhere. I mean, I can go and play, like, for example, there is VR esports basketball, simulated basketball, but I could go do that locally, but
you can't fly.
Yeah, exactly. You can't fly in a zero gravity arena. However, I will say that the since it is going to be ending soon, I am looking at other options, and I do also play first person shooters, and I think the sports like the basketball one interests me a bit. And there's so many out there, Connor. I mean, like, really, if you've had it in flat games, you're going to have it in VR. And some things like, for example, baseball and tennis are two good examples where they're actually not only having that as a VR esport and they compete with that with tournaments and stuff, but they also have some of those set up to train the professionals. They use it for their actual training for physical in reality tennis and soccer, for example, or not soccer, baseball, for example. It's really cool.
So let's transition that
Go ahead.
a little bit toward the healthcare side. What role do you think immersive technology will play in the future of healthcare specifically? You talked about training sports athletes. How is that going to transition to healthcare professionals or, trainees in the healthcare industry?
Well, a couple of different ways. I mean, to hop off of the esports side of it for a second, but using that same idea, I definitely know that there are programs out there already right now that they're using to train healthcare professionals. And so if you practice something, as everybody knows, I'm sure probably everybody, you have mostly healthcare professionals watch this. So I'm going to say it the opposite and say, all right, for anyone who's had to have an IV by someone who isn't very experienced, that if they had the chance to practice that more, it would be a smoother, process. Sure. And so I had an IV recently this summer where that happened. And my doctor said he had not had to put in an IV in like a year and a half.
Sure.
And so I'm sitting there and I was like, I think maybe you need to do this. And he was like, oh yeah, I totally forgot that step. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a little scary.
Oh my goodness.
But the point in that being, as far as your question, Connor, we all have those little things that sometimes we just need little refreshers or whatever. So for that purpose, I think VR is a great thing to just do review or do training, or especially for people still in that process of it. You just really get to go through something over and over and over and over until it becomes your muscle memory, which is really important in a lot of professions. And I think that is important in the medical profession because you want to make sure that your medical professionals know this stuff so well inside out that there's no question there. But in answer to that question, that's one of the uses I think that it's good for. And another one, I'll tell you another important one on the flip side of that real quick is for patients. Like, for example, you can put patients in a VR headset, and there are some apps I'm already aware of now that will show them exactly what they're getting ready to experience or go through. And so it's really good from a first person perspective where you have that presence there to say, this is what's happening, even to the detail of somebody who's having heart surgery. Some people may not be interested in this, but like for me, I'm an intelligent person. I'm very curious. If I have procedures done, I want to know exactly what's being done to me. So I would absolutely hop in a VR headset and say, oh, okay, you're going to throw this through here, go to this artery, go here, put this stent in, whatever, And so I think it's useful in so many ways.
So do you think that your care team, back when you were first treated, right, effectively gaslighted, right, but back when you first went through this treatment that ended up putting you in a chair, do you think that your care team would have been different if they had immersive trainings that included the social determinants of health, like your situation?
Yes, absolutely.
What's up, Connor?
I was just going to say, first off, can we define social determinants of health for those
Yes.
that don't understand.
So
Absolutely.
absolutely. So yeah, it could get confusing. So it's not just about like the environment, but your social determinants of health are like conditions in which people are born, grow, live, and work. Your age, factors like socioeconomic status, education. I'm reading to make sure that I'm accurate here, right? Neighborhood, physical environment, employment, social support. So it's really the whole picture of the patient are your social determinants of your health that you may find a halo patient in front of you and you don't know, a high acuity, low occurrence patient. You don't see them often, but if you make the wrong decision here, you're going to put them in a wheelchair. So, Sonya, if your care team had access to immersive competency trainings that helped them with numerous clinical decisions in an iterative environment, which is what immersive technologies allow, do you think the outcome would have been different for you?
I do actually, and I totally understand what you're asking there. Let me just start and say, like, I really liked my doctor. I still like my doctor. He's a great doctor, and he gave me good care. This was my youngest child, and at that point, I think he had been my doctor for 12 years or something. So, I mean, he had been my doctor a long time, and so my OB doctor. But the weekend when I started having problems, he was out of town.
I see.
And so the care team that was there, let me just say, he was at a teaching sort of institution, and the care team was largely younger medical professionals. And so one issue was, just to give you a very clear demonstration of the kind of concerns that I had that you're bringing up here. When I went in, I was kind of telling them I was having some issues and some problem, and it just didn't feel right. And I was like, I just feel like something's wrong there. Now, you have to remember, this was my 5th child. Okay.
Mhm.
I had been pregnant. My oldest at that point was 7. So this was my 5th child in 7 years. It's not like I forgot what it felt like.
Goodness
And
me. You're amazing.
So I still remember very clearly one of the doctors that came in, and he said, of course it doesn't feel right or good. He was like, this is your 5th baby in 7 years. Maybe you should just consider not getting pregnant anymore. And
how kind.
Exactly. And, he said, after you have this baby, we can discuss with you different forms of birth control. And I'm like, wow, like I didn't come in here to seek a moral opinion or to discuss with you birth control. I came in here because I'm having pain that I feel like shouldn't be there. And I've explicitly stated it felt like there was something pushing on my uterus. Okay. Now, from the perspective of someone who's never been pregnant, especially maybe a male or a female, but particularly
Sure.
male, who doesn't necessarily understand that some women may even have a greater sense of feeling of their bodies. I absolutely knew and felt that something wasn't right. And I could feel that, that pressure. It may have been a tiny clot, but I could feel the pressure that shouldn't have been there. And so I feel like if there had been training where they maybe could be put in situations of, first of all, that's part of just social training. You need to listen to your patients and not assume that your patients don't know what they're talking about. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, as far as pregnant patients and those specific types of problems, I think that you always have to look and see what else could be going on wrong here. And you speak to that. If there were, say, a scenario in VR where they talk to the patient and then the patient gives responses and they go back and forth in those simulations, I think that would be, for example, a good simulation where they could say, no, and blow me off and have the result that actually happened, which I almost died. Or they could have a simulation where you ask the right questions and say, you know what? It would have taken them exactly one test. All they would have had to do was do a CT scan. All they would have had to do was do one scan on me. You know what they did after my baby was born? She came out so fast and hard. Immediately, my blood pressure shot sky high. I passed out, and they're like, "Oh, well, that was weird. She, shouldn't be having any more kids. Her blood pressure went too high." And I'm like, okay. So, and you're like, something's
I'm
not
sorry.
right.
Even I know as a paramedic that renal function has a direct impact on your blood pressure, which is why when patients have renal failure and they come in and their blood pressure is 200 over 150, it's a kidney issue.
Yeah.
They're a dialysis patient.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not a doctor.
they excused it by saying it was just because she was born so quickly, and they still did not at all listen to the fact that I still kept saying something doesn't feel right. So then the next day I was sent home and I felt absolutely horrible. I felt horrible. Well, then I started developing a fever, and I was like, something just isn't right. And remember, I still just felt wrong. Well, then I went back to the ER and I told him, I said, something's really wrong. Like, this is my 5th baby and I feel like I'm dying. I said, it just doesn't feel right. And so they did they took my pee and came back and told me I must have a UTI because there was blood in my urine. Now, you guys have probably done enough of this to know that if you've just had a baby, you're going to have blood in your pee because there's blood everywhere, and it's good as a healthcare show because your people probably don't care to hear that. But my point is, I wouldn't say that on a regular podcast, but the fact of the matter is, of course there's blood, And so I was like, it's not a UTI. There's something else wrong. So I went home again. They told me, no, just take these antibiotics. You'll be fine. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I went home. Well, then my doctor called me a few hours later and he said, how are you feeling? I said, like I'm going to die. And he said, tell me what's going on. Cause he had just gotten back in town. And I told him.
Oh, and this is your doctor who knows you.
This is my doctor who knows me. And he knows one very important thing, which is what I think would help in what you said at the very beginning of this question. High acuity patients that don't, what you described there. He knew me. I never complain about stuff. I'm very mild. I'm happy. I'm pretty healthy, And if I say something, I mean it. Like if it's to be taken very seriously. And so he said, tell me what's going on. I told him, he said, I want you to come to the hospital right now. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, don't pack, don't do anything. He said, come right now. And so I was like, okay. So I went over and he immediately was waiting for me. They did a scan and found that I had the two blood clots. Of course, they admitted me. And then it goes back to the story I shared at the beginning. But I feel like, yes, part of this goes to a testimony of the doctor-patient relationship and how very important that is. I think, making sure you know your patients and stay in touch, but also just as far as the people who didn't know that and treated me certain other ways, I do feel like there was an amount of disrespect and gaslighting, like, oh, she's a woman getting pregnant. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm also an intelligent person who knows how I'm getting pregnant. Right. And I also know what my body feels like and what's wrong with it. And so it was just an experience that I would not wish upon anyone. And
it happens every day. It's happening right now. It's happening right now in healthcare somewhere. So I appreciate you coming on here to tell your story. And because I lived. If you're out there listening, right? Yeah, you lived through it. And if you're out there listening, this isn't just one person's voice. She represents an entire population, and we can make a difference one step at a time. And so that's part of the reason why we have these conversations. So I really appreciate you kind of exposing your soft underbelly on the Immersive Medical Pod. I really appreciate it.
Well,
we have a few more questions for you. Oh, absolutely. We have a few more questions for you. I want to be mindful of the time because we are running a little low on time. Sure. We have a few more questions, and we have a fun lightning round that we didn't prepare you for, and that's easy. Those are questions like, what's your favorite color? Those are easy questions. And then I have a fun little project that I want to share with you because I asked you a question before you came on. Okay. And so we're going to get around to that. All right. Before we go any further, I want to give a shout out to our friends at VR Patients. VR Patients is bringing the future of scalable clinical education to you with the world's first virtual reality simulation authoring tool. What the heck is that? It basically means educators can author patient scenarios and medical illnesses in VR, no coding required. These guys have turned medical training into a fully immersive experience. Whether you have 10 students or 10,000, VR Patients allows you to tailor the experience to your exact needs. Head on over to vrpatients.com, that's vrpatients.com, and get the lowdown on this game-changing platform. And if you have a VR headset at home, You can try it right now for free on the MetaQuest or Steam store. Connor, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so starting with our fun project thing. We've heard your story, and we want to know if you had a magic wand and it could solve one problem that you see in healthcare, what would it be? How would you change the healthcare industry?
Oh, I forgot what I wrote to you now. I think I said basically what we were talking about, that there would be less gender bias, because I think there's a lot of gender bias toward women and male and female doctors, to be quite honest. A lot of times I feel like are less likely to listen to a woman versus a man. And part of that's just societal, but I think it's really sad, especially considering the fact that, and in regards specifically to what we just discussed with pregnancy and childbirth, the United States has a ridiculously poor record for pregnancy and childbirth. Like, it's really awful what our stats are.
We got the best healthcare in the world and abysmal maternity
exactly
rates of health.
Yeah, it's really, so that's the kind of thing. You know why that is? In my opinion, part of that is because of what I just said, because there's gender bias and people treat women like they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't know what they don't listen to what their bodies are telling them. And then they gaslight us and make you feel like there's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your body, even though you know there is. And so if I were to be able to fix one thing that I think would make a big difference, aside from stuff like lower cost and things like that, as far as something I think would help overall, it would be that.
What I love about what you're saying right now, and just to clarify for everyone, gaslighting is effectively like, it's a form of psychological manipulation where you make the victim you sow self-doubt in their head and what they believe is reality or what's actually happening, and you're just kind of making them feel small, and what you think isn't really happening, right?
Hey, and Devin, I'll pop in and say one thing real quick. I know
yes,
we have to be careful on time, but an example, we've given some ways that has happened, but I'll tell you one thing I learned from this experience. And I will say it was that I wanted to live, and I value my life, and I was never going to let somebody treat me that way again. Because if I listened to the doctors the 3 or 4 times I went in before my daughter was born, trying to tell them this. I was at the ER and I was at the OB telling them this, and I would go home and I didn't insist and say, you know what? No, go do a scan. Do this now. Right. So then after that, I learned some lessons. And like a year or 2 later, I had to go to the ER because I knew I was getting another blood clot. Like, I could tell. I still to this day can tell you, I start having an increased temperature. I have certain symptoms that show up. And so I went in, and this doctor came in, and you guys can look at me, and I look relatively normal. You can look at my body even, and it looks
You do look normal. You look like a human.
I appreciate it. And, my body even, it's really not what like, I don't have varicose veins, for example, none at all. And so I went to this ER, and the doctor's looking at me, and he's like, you don't look like you've ever had a blood clot in your life. Now, I'm in there because I'm wanting him to check me for this, because I'm certain I'm developing a new one. So he's looking at me visually and telling me that he doesn't believe what I'm telling him, because there's no way I could look this healthy and be this way if I had those problems. And so this is the important part of this. I learned over the previous few years, I am my best advocate, and I need to insist that they listen to me. So I very politely asked for the nurse to come in. She came in, and I said, I would like for this doctor to leave my room, and I do not want him allowed back in my room until he has read my chart and my history. I said, I have a history of blood clots. I have another blood clot. He is not listening to me, and I will not leave here until he either reads my chart or has a doctor come in here that's going to listen to me.
Good for you.
So it was not easy, because I'm a very nice person, and I'm like, I don't like conflict at all. But I have learned through this experience, it partly taught me that you have to do that, because there are a lot of doctors out there that really don't listen, and they make assumptions that aren't proper, especially towards women.
Well, I think that problem runs deep, because I used to work in the emergency department, and I first want to echo what you're saying, is that you are your best advocate as a patient, right? And what is the worst that could happen? that you stand up for yourself and what? They discharge you. They're not going to kick you out. You're sitting in the chair. You're sitting in the bed. You're there for care, right? I have been in the emergency department where someone pulled a knife on us and they still got care. So, right? So stand up for yourself. And I'm glad that you are using this microphone to tell that to the audience. So that's awesome. What you're talking about, though, really excites me because we're talking about all these problems that we could solve. And I know that you mentioned IVs and training and skills training for how can immersive solutions make an impact in this type of healthcare environment. Now, I personally would argue that learning to do a physical skill in virtual reality that requires you to pull a trigger on a controller is probably not going to teach you how to do IVs. However, learning all the other problems that you mentioned, because that was just one example, right?
Yeah.
All the other problems that you mentioned were competency, decisions, being put in a situation where you're forced to make a care decision or to interact with a patient with dialogue and show good bedside manner and competent care.
Yeah.
Those are all things that we can train for effectively with immersive solutions. And that really excites me because how much more time can we give these physicians when they're having a hard time coming up with time to sit with you and hear your story? So that's probably what that physician's problem was, right? He's like, here's another one. This is my 50th patient of the day. I get what's going on. I'm going to go on there. I'm going to look at her. I got it. Don't worry about it. Let's get her out of here and do the blood work and send her home. But you stopped him.
Yeah.
Which was good. Not everyone's going to do that. But that physician's time is also really stacked.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's got a huge patient ratio.
Yeah.
And same with the nurses, who are our best advocates, by the way. If not our own, it's the nurse.
Yeah, for sure.
We know they run the hospital. So I love the idea of new AI technologies helping reduce the amount of charting that physicians have to do so they can actually sit with you longer and have a conversation, or increase their level of competency through immersive remote training that allows them to engage in competency and continue their CEs they've got to do anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
So I love that idea. And thank you for kind of highlighting all of that for us.
You're welcome.
So let's, I think it's time for me to, did you already ask the question, Connor? Yeah, you did, right? That's how we got down this road. Okay, so I asked you early to email me if you could wave a magic wand, right? What would be the one thing that you could fix? But what I didn't tell you was that we decided to ask GPT-4 that question to see if AI had any ideas.
Oh, that's right.
And so we're going to see what AI has to say about solving this problem in healthcare that you have highlighted for us. And I want to put the disclaimer out there once again. This is only the second time that we've done this, but it was a lot of fun the first time we did it, so we're doing it again. I just want to say to everybody, this is not medical recommendation. It's an AI language model. We're just seeing what it has to say to see if maybe it makes you think of an idea, or maybe it actually has a good one that could work. All right. So I asked it if it would act as an expert in healthcare for U.S. policy in healthcare, okay, and help me solve this problem, which is gender bias, such as gaslighting in females and women, okay? And after it gives me its little disclaimer that it's just a language model, it gives me a multi-pronged approach. So I'm going to read you some of the highlights, okay? And then I actually asked it to just give me what's going to be the most effective to do now, all right? And the answers are incredible. All right, so again, this is just ChatGPT-4. To effectively address this issue that Sonya has brought up, a multi-pronged approach that involves various stakeholders, including policymakers, healthcare professionals, educators, and the general public is necessary. Here are some steps that can be taken. 1, policy changes. Okay, that's pretty vague. So they advocate for policies at the federal and state level that aims to reduce gender bias in healthcare. Okay, cool. Something like funding for women's health research, greater transparency in reporting gender-specific health outcomes, and penalties for healthcare institutions that demonstrate gender bias. Okay. 2, education and training. Incorporate gender sensitivity and unconscious bias training into medical and nursing school curricula. What I love about that is that it attacks it at the attacks the problem at the point where we have initial education, new nurses coming to the table, right? We want to help healthcare professionals recognize and address their own biases and then contribute to a more equitable healthcare environment. Standardized guidelines develop and implement standardized guidelines for the treatment and management of various conditions with a focus on addressing potential gender bias. Kind of like that. That allows healthcare makers to make objective decisions and then minimize their influence of their personal biases.
Yeah.
A data-driven approach, collect and analyze data on patient experiences and then identify patterns that might affect gender bias and disparities in care. Kind of like that one. I like all of these. These are all potential solutions, right? Patient advocacy and support. Obviously, that's what we're just talking about right now. Mm-hmm. We know that your immediate care team should be your biggest advocate. We at every level. But empower patients to be more informed and assertive about their healthcare needs by establishing patient advocacy groups and provide resources to help patients navigate the healthcare system, which I think is cool. So then I said, wow, you're so good, Mr. AI or Mrs. AI, whatever. But what do you think are the quickest to implement and the most impactful? Just give me the short list. And its first response is my favorite. The most impactful and quickest to implement solution from the recommendations provided would be education and training. Incorporating gender sensitivity and unconscious bias training into the medical and nursing school curricula. And I would like to think through immersive solutions, more than just reading off of a PowerPoint or reading off of a paper. You know, I think standardized patients are an excellent way to put someone in a situation that makes them actually feel like they're communicating with another person. And immersive technologies allow you to do that at scale.
Yeah,
you can be at home in your chair, no matter what you look like or what your physical impairments are, and you can practice your competency on unconscious bias, making better care decisions, dialogue with your patient.
Yeah, and the good thing about that too is what you just said about being able to do that at home. I feel like people are more honest in VR. If you're in a situation where, let's say you're in a headset and you're having one of those simulations, and you are more likely to respond honestly to that simulated character versus in a real life situation where you have a person there and you know you're being watched or judged or you're getting quote graded or whatever. So I feel like that's another good use for it. Absolutely. It's more effective. It's more effective because people are going to get a truer feedback on it, right? Because then they do it and then they're going to see, wow, I really was biased or whatever.
So I love what you're talking about right now. I talk with nurses all the time, and one of them asked me a question when we were having a discussion about the power of immersive simulation training. And she said, well, what about the debrief? Because we were talking about doing things at scale and allowing students to practice in the comfort of their own home in an objective simulation. And she says, well, what about the debrief? It's so important for the proctor to like intervene and work with the student on what just happened. And my response to her was, you can still have those debriefs, but I want you to imagine a world where those students who were there in person for class day to then have a simulation with you in person and then have a debrief right there has seen 300 patients.
Yeah.
Has done the simulation hundreds of times with a diverse and inclusive avatar, environments that include your social determinants of health and stories and different dialogue. The questions that they ask you on sim day in person are going to be different.
Yeah.
And we want them to fail fast and fail often at home in the comfort of their own environment or in class. But on that day when they need to own up, we want the confidence to be there. We want them to ask difficult questions. Like, hey, I was in this situation and it really made me think, did I make the right choice? Because I think I would do it again. That's a good conversation to have with your proctor.
Right.
Versus, hey, the simulation is really cool. How do I do this?
Yeah.
Hey, man, I know that sim day is fun, but we really need to get over the coolness factor and get back to the core curriculum of what you're learning.
Yeah.
I met this guy who is doing immersive simulation for his cohort. He puts students in VR every single day for medical simulation, and he does it intentionally to make the technology fade into the background. So it's no longer about the coolness factor. It's just
that's good. Yeah.
I think we have arrived at our lightning round. Thank you so much for playing today. The game show's over, and this new little mini game show is going to begin.
Yay! I love games.
Who wants to go? Yeah, let's do it. Okay, I'll start this time. Is that all right, Connor?
Yep. by all means.
On your marks, get set. What's your favorite color?
I like all colors.
Oh, the rainbow. I love it.
Boo.
Oh,
Pick one.
What's one of your favorite colors?
I like all of them. Orange.
Orange.
is a
Hey, me
good one.
too.
That's Devin's favorite.
That's my favorite.
Favorite way. Yeah. Favorite way to unwind after work.
Oh, definitely playing VR. Totally.
I would have to guess. Yes.
Asking an esports game or a
Totally.
softball question.
That's an easy one.
Favorite book, fiction or nonfiction?
Book. Fiction. I love juvenile nonfiction. Not one in particular, but I love landmark books. They're juvenile books, nonfiction that were written back in the 60s. And also, I've written 8 books. They're not my favorites, but just throwing that out there. Somebody one day can say my books are their favorite.
Well,
My
we're gonna have to put.
I wrote was
We're gonna put the link in the show notes to your books. Okay.
We'll make sure to. Next question. Besides your personal superpower to sense when you're getting a new blood clot, like you talked about earlier, what superpower would you have?
Well, I really do like flying through zero gravity. I would love to be able to fly myself without being in a plane.
All right, there you go.
I think flying's been a hot topic.
It's a hot one.
All the superpower questions.
Yeah, that would be cool.
If you could go anywhere in the world, where would you travel to?
Oh, I travel a lot, and I go anywhere I want.
All right.
I already do
Can I
that.
get a ticket?
VR.
Can I get a ticket?
Well, yeah, I could do it in VR, but I just got back from England a couple weeks ago, and I've been to Switzerland and China. When you face death and you live with health problems, you decide at some point, how do you want to live? And I just decided I always wanted to travel. And so now, a couple of times a year, I pick a place and go there.
That sounds like a healthy thing to do that I do not have the funds to afford.
What's one of your favorite ones? Can you give us one that really stood out to you?
Costa Rica. I love Costa Rica. And I really loved Switzerland. I was in the Alps. England is a little wet and cold, not necessarily, but I like the people there. Spain was fun. China was very cool. The people were amazing. And I saw the terracotta warriors. And so, I just feel like I'll be gone one day. All of us will. And as far as your comment, Connor, I don't have a lot. And I live in a mobile home. I don't care. It's fine for me because I love what I do with my job and I travel when I can. And so any extra money I have, that's what I do with it because I just want to enjoy what time I have here and the people I'm around.
We actually didn't talk about your job. Could you tell us what you do?
We didn't.
Yes, I am head of programming for AWE, which is Augmented World Expo. AWE is the largest and longest running XR tech event in the world. And I arrange all the speakers, the sessions, the special events and stuff for our in-person events in USA and Europe, and also our online programming.
And we will put a link in the show notes for the next AWE conference, which is coming up at the end of May.
Yes, very soon.
2023.
And then our final closing question. We talked a lot about changing the healthcare industry. If you could give advice to any new student going through healthcare or nursing education, EMS education, healthcare training, what have you, what would the advice be?
Yeah. So I know, like Devin mentioned, they're crunched for time. They are very, very busy. There's so much pressure on medical professionals, but the prejudice I experienced being a woman, being a mother of 5, homeschooling, didn't mention that in this interview. I homeschooled my kids the whole way through. And having to be a person who required pain medication for numerous years. There was so much prejudice and discrimination towards me when I would go to the doctor, even though I had good doctors myself. Like if I was outside my area or I had to go to urgent care, ER, whatever. So I would say, please try to not be that way. Don't be prejudiced. Don't discriminate. Don't assume that the reason that person is there. Listen to them, what they're saying. Don't look at them and make a judgment. That would be seriously my top recommendation. Don't look at anybody and make a judgment. You don't know what that person's history is, or even if you see the history, you don't know how that ties into their current situation unless you listen to them. And so, like, for example, for me, I never, ever, ever went to the ER or something to get pain medicine because you get that from your doctor, but if they saw that on my record, they would immediately be like, writing off my other problem or complaint because they're like, oh, this person's here. They take opioids, that must be why they're here. It's like, no, that's not why I'm here. So I think it's just really sad that we see so much of that, because you're missing the opportunity to just listen to them when they come in and help them for whatever the problem is they're there for.
It's great.
Thank you.
Sonya, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Sonya, before you head out, do you have anything you want to plug? You want people to check out the AWE conference? Do you want to push out your social medias? Where can people find you?
For sure. Yeah, that's great. So basically, AWE is happening this year, May 31st to June 2nd in Santa Clara, California. They can find the website, awexr.com. And my personal socials, people can look me up, Sonya Haskins, or my gamer tag is Hasko7. That's HASKO number 7. And so Twitter and LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm on pretty much everywhere. But if people have questions or want to reach out or would like to follow up on any of this stuff, anything we discussed here, then I'm happy to do that. I really think it's important to advocate for these issues. And so I'm happy to talk about it. And obviously from this interview, I don't mind getting personal, but if it's for the purpose of trying to help others better understand how we can improve on these issues.
I'm pretty sure you just came up with the tagline for this show. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Helping the audience come up with better ways to understand issues. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the next Immersive Medical Pod. Thank you, Sonya. Hey, Connor, are you finding it challenging to organize asynchronous clinical education for all your students?
Devin, I don't have any students.
Well, that's okay, because no matter the class size, from 10 to 10,000 students, we have the perfect solution for you.
VR Patients isn't just a virtual reality platform. It's an asynchronous learning tool, which means students can access it anywhere, anytime.
Exactly. They can jump into a VR simulation from their VR headset or even from their web browser. Clinical competency training doesn't have to be confined to a specific schedule or location anymore.
To learn more about how VR Patients can make learning more accessible and scalable, head over to vrpatients.com. That's vrpatients.com.
And if you don't have any students just like Connor, but you do have a VR headset, you can try it right now for free on the MetaQuest Store or Steam.